Who are the 2025 NFL Draft's elite prospects? Clean first-round grades, and knowing that information, how does it change how teams will attack the draft board in 2025? All that and more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks everybody for making this your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Love and appreciate all the everydayers out there. You probably already subscribed up if you listen every day, but make sure you are. Helps us out tremendously. And hit that thumbs up on YouTube. Let us know you stopped by at least. And if you're new to the program, welcome. Hang out with us every day. We're breaking down the NFL draft, all the trades, all the free agency, everything going on every day throughout the NFL offseason. So subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. And today's episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just go to FanDuel.com to get started. Okay, the topic for this podcast, Matt, started with an article from ESPN's Matt Miller. And I just want to start out by saying, you know, he does great work. There's tons of great NFL analysts out there. But it's sort of my disagreement with his premise is why I wanted to bring this topic up. And I'm interested to see how you feel about it the more we dive into this 2025 NFL draft class. And the short,
I want to hear it because we don't disagree very much. So I'm kind of curious how you're going here.
So Matt Miller put out an article on ESPN, and basically he said there's only 12 first-round grades in this year's draft class, according to him. Now, he's not saying that this is how the NFL feels about it. He says, this is how I feel. Matt Miller, ESPN draft analyst, gave out only 12 first-round grades, which is a very low number. There's 32 picks. So
right.
There's 32 picks in the first round. Generally, most years, Matt, right, there's 18 to 22. Most years people say, there's about 20 clean first round grades that would be first rounders most years. And then once you get to the end of the first round, you might be finding one of your guys and one team says, oh, I did have a first round grade on this. Other team's like, I didn't have a first round grade. He's a second round guy. And you might be drafting from your second round pool of players when you get to the end of the first round. Most years, that's just, the way it goes. So around 20. So if you have a lot less than 18, 20 first round grades, that means it's not that great of a draft class and not top heavy. And I would agree to an extent that it's not a super top-heavy class, and it's more about depth than about being a top-heavy class. But 12 is a really low number. And I'm gonna list the players here, and you can go to ESPN and read the whole article and his explanation of everything. I'm going to read the players that Matt Miller gave 12 first-round grades to. And if he's correct about this, what that means, and if he's incorrect, which I believe he is about this, what that means for the NFL draft and how this goes. So the 12 first round grades that Matt Miller gave out in this year's class: Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, and totally agree there. I think they're in a blue chip class of their own in this class right now. I put a tier break under those two guys. So not going to fight at all about that. Next, he's got number 3 in his board, Will Johnson, cornerback out of Michigan. He's got some comps for these players too that we can talk about. But he's got Mason Graham, defensive tackle out of Michigan, 4. Jalen Walker, the edge rusher, and he's got him listed as an edge rusher, which is key, not a linebacker, out of Georgia at 5. Ashton Genty, running back from Boise State, 6. Will Campbell, offensive tackle from LSU. Kelvin Banks, offensive tackle from Texas. 2 tight ends are on the list. Tyler Warren from Penn State, 9. Colston Loveland from Michigan at 11. He's got Jahdae Barron, who's a name that I'm seeing more and more that teams like a lot as a first-round defensive back, cornerback out of Texas. He's got him 10, and then he's got Michael Williams, the big edge rusher from Georgia. There's only 3 teams represented here, by the way. It's all Georgia.
They're all Texas, Georgia,
yeah. And that's number 12. So that's it. Those are the first-round grades that Matt Miller gives out here. What are your thoughts on that and those names and the idea that there's only 12 first-round grades this year, which is a very low number?
Okay, so I don't think we're disagreeing. I thought you were going to take a different stance on this. So I urge everyone. Another analyst that I like a lot is Lance Zierlein, and he just put out his. He writes up every player at the combine, man. He's insane. I mean, but all that stuff just hit NFL.com. And the reason I bring it up is because if you go to any of the prospects that Lance's preliminary written up pre-combine, and you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a grading system that basically the NFL uses. And why I bring that up to start is, if I'm Joe Scout that does the Southeast or whatever, I don't put a 3rd round grade on a guy. I put on a 6.7 to 6.9, which means year 1 starter. I mean, above that would be like Pro Bowl talent. You know, I mean, like it's a goofy system. You know,
And it's based on it's similar to the baseball 80 to 20 scouting scale. I think that's where the NFL got their stuff, just because baseball scouting was, kind of a little bit older. It's an older sport in America, at least. We're not talking about a different football that's a lot older than that. But a lot of these things are kind of related in how teams do things. So in baseball, it's an 80-20 scouting scale where 20 is like rock bottom and 80 is like you are an all-time great in that one category. So, 5-tool player in baseball is, power, hit for contact, hit for or speed, defense, arm, right? Those are the 5 tools in baseball. And, if you have an 80 power, you're talking Babe Ruth, right? You're talking, the
as rare as it could be.
Right. And so it doesn't go to 10. And so that's why it's kind of a funky scale. You see someone like Ashton Genty is Zerline's top guy, and it's 7.15, and it's the best grade in the draft. And you're like, how is 7.15 the best? And then there's a 4th round guy who's got like a 6.27. There's not a lot of separation in the numbers, which is why it's like a little bit hard to grasp. And so like if you're below 5, you're worthless. And if you're a 7, you're amazing. And so that's the thing I don't like about that grading scale, is because and the part of the reason why there's so many numbers that don't count is you still have to grade players who aren't going to make it. So you might have to look at a player and grade him something, and it's like, well, he belongs on the scale because you have to give him a number, but he's not draftable, so he's like a 4.5 or whatever, like that. So and there's worse guys than him. They're 3.5 or whatever. But anyway, think of 8 as like a Hall of Famer.
8's a perfect prospect, is the way he writes it. Yeah. Which doesn't exist. Like you said, 7.1's awesome. So like basically 5.5 is a priority free agent. That's kind of garbage, but it's an NFL player, sort of. 8's perfect. So everyone basically falls in between there. And if you're over 7, it's awesome. But just to tell a quick story, like I was part of Scouts Inc. whenever people probably don't remember that. ESPN bought us. That's when Todd McShay came to ESPN, and we had always used this system. And ESPN's like, none of our listeners and viewers are going to know what the heck you're talking about. Please make it from 1 to 100 like everyone else on the planet grades people. So that's how Scouts Inc. switched it over. Like, this is kind of dumb. I mean, Joe Average Accountant on ESPN.com does not want to listen to this, or doesn't want to decipher this. Anyway, so my point is, scouts don't really give. This is a 2nd round grade. They might have 5 guys they think are 1st-year starters or whatever. I mean, so they all have different categories. Now, I look at it, back to the Matt Miller thing, as at the top of the draft, you're either like a blue chipper, which is Myles Garrett, Caleb Williams, like basically a top 5 pick. Even Genty, I think, is a blue chipper, or Bijan. Right. That doesn't mean you go in the top 5, but you have a really, really high grade. You're basically an elite prospect, not a perfect prospect. They really don't exist, but you're basically an elite prospect. So for this exercise, I think there's blue chippers, and then there's dudes that I would say like Matt's doing here is pretty much any year they came out would be 1st round picks. Yeah. And I will say, and I think in this particular class, as it is in late February pre-combine, I think it's light on blue chippers, and it's light on basically 1st round picks, no matter when they come out. But I do really like day 2, and I like the depth, of the class overall compared to recent years.
let's get a little bit more in depth in this. Who are the blue chippers for us? Who are the first rounders for us? Maybe not name every single one of them, but the reason I disagree with Matt, and I would actually take his premise I would take it more extreme in both directions. I actually think there's more first rounders, but I think there's actually fewer clean first rounders than Matt Miller lists out.
Okay.
There.
Okay. Interesting.
Next. Today's episode of Peacock Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And right now, I know football season is over, and it might be a bummer for some NFL fans out there. But the good thing about the Super Bowl being over is that it's a clean slate again. You get to watch the offseason, and you get to bet on your football team to win next year's Super Bowl. And you can bet on the NFL still at FanDuel. And I always say it. And look, if you listen to this podcast, maybe get a little extra edge on the house when it comes to NFL draft props. I love betting on the NFL draft. It's the best way, I think, to bet at FanDuel all year long with those tasty NFL draft props. And there's more and more coming all the time at FanDuel. But it's NBA season right now, and the NBA action is getting really heated up here after the trade deadline, after the All-Star break is when things really start to cook. And by the way, the college tournament coming up here pretty soon in March as well. And there's no better place to get in on all that basketball action than FanDuel, and live bets as well. You can bet throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off, you can bet on that fourth quarter comeback. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Okay, so there's two major disagreements I have with Matt Miller on his list. A, that there's only 12 first-round grades this year. And B, that the 12 would be the names on his list. So, I want to start with this. If the assertion is that, like you said, Matt, okay, these guys would be a first-round guy every year,
no matter what,
all day long. I actually think the list is shorter than this 12. Like, if we're talking about the truly elite players in this class,
I kind of agree. Yeah,
and some work.
A lot of questions with these guys.
Yeah, but that's the thing is, like, you're going to draft a guy with questions in the first round of a draft too. So first rounders, I think it's actually a deep class, and there's a lot of guys. There's going to be guys going in the second round, I think, in this draft that some teams have first round grades on. It's a deep class.
Okay, so
but if you're talking every single year clean first round grade, no doubt, I think the list shrinks a lot, and it's a shorter list than Matt Miller gives out here. It's Carter, it's Hunter, again, the tier their own. I think Will Johnson, I like that Matt Miller has him third, because that tells me that Matt Miller thinks he's going to go to the combine and run well, and he might very well be the third prospect in that case. And I think right now some people are hedging when they grade Will Johnson because, like, he's awesome. Is he fast enough? Is he a true shutdown guy? Matt Miller gave the comp to Patrick Surtain. If you're 6'2" and you run 4.42 and you have the ability and the instincts that Will Johnson has, you're a high first round pick all day long, right? He still has to complete the landing there at the combine, Will Johnson. And by the way, Will Johnson has another red flag in that he didn't finish the season healthy either.
Right. So wasn't a great year for him.
Huge for him. If he shows up at the combine healthy and able to work out and works out great, Will Johnson is in that category, maybe even closer to the Travis Hunter category of corners, and at least in that next tier of, like, top elite guys with Mason Graham. And so that's why I like that Will Johnson's in this, and I would put him in that list. He doesn't have any wide receivers on his list. I would put Tet McMillan in the same category, unless you consider. By the way, terrible comp Odell Beckham Jr. for Travis Hunter. He has him listed as a wide receiver. I get ball skills, but that's that they have in common. Odell Beckham was like 25 pounds heavier than Travis Hunter, and was a full-time wide receiver.
Explosive, and they kind of move the same, but some of the comps I didn't love.
Didn't love that comp. I like the Champ Bailey comp for Travis Hunter, because Bailey was one of those guys that played a little bit of both ways in college, and was a ridiculous athlete and had ball skills and ended up being a corner. Didn't really dabble that much at wide receiver in the NFL. Where's I going with this? Tet McMillan is another guy. Tet McMillan runs 4.45. You're good. You're in that category. I probably write him in ink in the top 10 of the NFL draft, right? If he does that. So I think Tet McMillan would be one of those guys. He's got star potential at wide receiver that you can't say a lot about other guys in that. And I would think Luther Burden would be in that class of guys as well, who deserves to be on this list and is not on that list. Genty, I get it. He's a running back, but he's going to have a very high grade for a lot of teams. And
I mean, he'll go first overall just because he's the highest grade, but right.
And I probably disagree with like putting a tight end on the list, even Tyler Warren. Like Tyler Warren's not Pitts as a prospect. He's a good prospect. Don't get me wrong. And he's a first rounder, but he's not like, oh, every single year, this guy's superstar stud. I mean, he's a tight end. How many tight ends go in the first round period? So Loveland and Warren on that list and putting them ahead of some other names. I get you're just grading them out, you're ranking them out, but that's why it's like the list gets pretty short when you start talking about the truly elite of this class. And this guy would be a dude every single year, clean first round grade. But at the same time, like Michael Williams, I get
those George edge guys. I don't quite see it in that light,
Again, like Jalen Walker is listed 5 here, and Dane Brugler had him at number 3. There's a lot to like about him. But his comp is Harold Landry. Harold Landry was a second-round guy. You're comping him to a second-round player,
Yeah, didn't light up the league when he got up there. Yeah,
right. Mason Graham, the comp is Matabuki. Well, that's not a first-round guy either. I get that. If you're comping him to Odell Beckham and Patrick Surtain, okay, that's clean. But if you're comping a guy to
I assume you're talking about this version of what Matabuke were turned into, not what he was drafted as.
Right. Yeah.
But still.
But even then, like, okay. Yeah,
I don't like comps, period. I'm so bad at them.
There usually needs to be a comp that's like this guy, but this, right?
Yeah, with a little more size or better ball skills.
And why you're comparing them. Right? Jahdae Barron, corner from Texas, gets a lot of Brian Branch comps. Brian Branch was a second-round pick and hit exactly what you thought he was going to be, right? So like a nickel safety, those players drop. And so that's kind of why I'm getting at this is like there's sort of some edge guys, there's some defensive linemen in this class that, you should never be shocked if they're going to go higher than a tight end, than a cornerback. So I think he's wrong with the names he puts here, and I think he's wrong with the premise, and he should either shorten or lengthen his list I guess what I'm getting at.
I agree with a lot of that too. So you're talking about comps. I just had one that is one of my all-time favorites. Remember the Jags first-round pick, Taven Bryan from Florida in 2018?
Yeah, late
big defensive. Yeah. The comp I heard from him that was dead on that I loved is J.J. Watt with a lobotomy. And that's what he was. He was just great. He didn't recognize anything. Didn't have any kind of instincts or any of that kind of stuff. So, all right, there's a lot to unpack there because I agree with a lot of the guys you even talked about. Like if we take it to 3 categories, the blue chippers, I don't even think Abdul Carter is Bosa or Garrett coming out. I mean, he's one of the best players in this draft, but I don't know that he's a top 3 pick any year he comes out or even top 5. He could be edge 2 a lot of years. He's small and he gets pushed around a little bit.
Speaking of comps, I was trying to find a comp for him. And on that same notion, it was like, who do you compare?
He's not Micah Parsons, despite what everyone else wants to think. I mean, right.
No, he's not the explosive power that Micah Parsons has. The comp
he's on the ground a lot.
To me, there's only one comp for him, but it's Von Miller. But it's like,
which is lofty.
Right. Is Von Miller? Von Miller was his number 2 pick in the draft. He was not a power player. But Von Miller had some of the most special, when you talk about bend and his body lean,
right?
Being able to rush the passer when his chest seemed like it was 2 inches off the ground. Unbelievable. And Carter may be one of the best guys we've seen since then. Is he that? Because that's one of the only, like, to put a, like, if you've never watched a guy, you're like, well, that's the way he wins. Pure speed, and he's got some other stuff. But like, are you expecting him to be Von Miller? Because that's kind of what you're telling me. If he's the number 1 pick in the draft, then he's that blue chip guy.
And you agree, I bet, that the Texas A&M version of Von Miller goes first overall in this draft. He goes ahead of Carter.
Yeah, well, he's got a longer track record, too. And there was still some people that were not sold on him because he wasn't a power player, didn't have a lot of size. Right? Like, we're going to draft a full-time edge player who's not that big. And it's hard for some teams to do because that's the other thing is like, whether it's James Pierce or Jalen Walker, some teams are going to be like, no, not drafting a 250-pound edge player in the first round, period.
Mm-hmm.
Get him off.
You can only pick from what's there.
Yeah.
But if the only blue chip guys are Genty, which I think absolutely applies, he's equal to Bijan to me, Carter and Hunter, that's a lot of questions for me. Like, I'm not taking Hunter over Jamar Chase. I'm not taking him over Champ Bailey. I'm not taking him over Patrick Ramsey, even if they only play one way. You know, I mean, I'm just talking about the prospect version of those guys. And then I do think he's missing a few of the first round picks, no matter what guys. You know, like I'm with you that McMillan should be in there unless he runs a 4.65. You know,
right? Exactly.
I also think Cam Ward should be in there, and I'm not super excited about the top of this class, but I think Cam Ward goes in the first round every year. I mean, I think he's good enough there. I think he's really separated himself as well. But I also think that third category is huge. I mean, we didn't talk about third category, but really like prospect 18, probably all the way to like 45, you know, deep into the second round. Like, of course, I'm always bringing back to the Steelers. Like, but Kevin Colbert was the GM for the Steelers for like 20 years. And I went back and I figured out what was his average draft spot that he earned. Not when you like trade up for Devin Bush or Polamalu or whatever, but it was like 24th overall. He basically never got anyone in the first two categories. You know, like Belichick never got anyone in the first two categories. You know what I mean? There's never 25 of those guys.
He got, who was the big 5-tech defensive lineman he got early in the 2000s? That was like the only guy he drafted in one of those categories. Gosh, really good.
Like Roethlisberger was, but I mean, like, there's not many of them. Plaxico Burress, and right.
Plaxico, that's a good one. I mean, really interesting player he was, man.
But I'm with you. I mean, I think that even Miller's list of 12 or whatever isn't as strong as most times. And I will fight you a little. I think Tyler Warren belongs, but I don't think Loveland belongs. I'm a Warren fan.
Yeah.
And even these O-linemen, are they really tackles?
Are we treating Tyler Warren like Brock Bowers right now? We're talking about him in the same area of the draft.
I think he goes even earlier, maybe. Yeah. That doesn't mean he should, or that he's better than Bowers. I think it's a reflection of how weak the top of the draft is. Like,
of the class, right? Yeah.
I think he's definitely going in the top 10.
Interesting. I mean, just so many of these guys. We'll finish up this conversation next, and we'll be sticking the landing. And then this is why I kind of have a problem with this, because even the guys that we're talking about as clean first rounders, you know, Michael Williams and Jalen Walker and some of these other guys, you still got to stick the landing. Oh. If you're a tight end going in the first round, you better go wild in Indy, right?
Shamar Stewart doesn't make any plays. You know, like, I mean, so many of these guys have big questions.
Okay, we'll get to that next, and we're going to say farewell to an all-time great offensive lineman in Zach Martin, who's retiring from the NFL next. Okay, so on that topic of sticking the landing, and this is kind of one of the things that I'm looking at is we've mentioned all these players. Like, so Michael Williams is getting treated like he's an athletic freak. It's like, okay, well, he's got 35-inch arms, but that's cool, but he didn't make near enough plays.
No.
Is he up at the combine? Because people are treating him like he's Trayvon Walker from a few years ago. Like,
right.
Well, let's calm down. Let's wait and see what he actually, because you're already projecting like he's an athletic freak. I know he's got long arms and he looks the part, but is he going to show up and throw down crazy? Is he going to be like 6'5", 270 and run 4.5? Is he going, is he that guy?
I don't think so.
I'm not sure yet. So let's calm down on that, because you're treating Michael Williams like he's a freak in nature. The tape doesn't tell you that, and he hasn't done that at the combine yet. And his teammate Jalen Walker, people are treating him like he's the next Micah Parsons. And look, he wore number 11. I get it. Right. And he might be, but again, he still has to stick the landing. He has to go to the combine and be 6'3", 250, have 34-inch arms, and then work out like crazy to be someone that you're talking about as a top 5 player in this draft. And that's a lot that he has to do, because he wasn't a full-time edge player in college. And I actually like Jalen Walker a lot. But if he shows up and he's 6'2", 240, and doesn't have crazy long arms, people aren't drafting him that high, period.
I would say the same thing. I don't think he's a linebacker. I know he can do it, but I do not want him being off the ball all the time. I know Abdul Carter can play linebacker too. That doesn't mean he's Luke Kuechly.
Yes,
And
right.
I mean, like Walker, he might be 6'1" and 7/8 and 240, like you said. And it's like, that's not even a first round guy. And he'll probably go in the first round no matter what in this draft. But sticking the landing is a good way of putting it. A lot of these guys have work to do. I keep going back to the offensive tackles. I mean, Will Campbell and Banks are good football players. They're going to help somewhere. And frankly, I know we're going to finish the show talking about Zach Martin. Maybe there's Zach Martin that was the tackle at Notre Dame.
Right.
It goes on and moves inside and goes to the Hall of Fame, and wonderful. But that's not a no-brainer first-round pick no matter what. I mean, that's why I keep coming back to what's his face, the Penn State offensive or the Ohio State offensive tackle who's hurt. If he can show that he's healthy, he might be O-line 1.
Right. No, I totally agree. And there's kind of one thing with almost all of these guys, and they can answer some of those questions next week in Indy for sure. Josh Simmons, it might take a little bit of time there. Will Campbell,
we may not get those answers, but yeah.
Right. But like to have no Tet McMillan on that list and have no Luther Burden on that list. Have we been watching NFL drafts? Like,
McMillan to me goes the first. I mean, he goes ahead of like Quentin Johnston and those guys.
That's what I'm saying. Like Quentin Johnston or Ricky Pearsall last year. You think Luther Burden's not a better prospect coming out than
now? Pearsall wouldn't have been on Miller's list in February.
Right. Oh, I'm just saying, like, we're talking about guys who are first rounders every year. Luther Burden is a first rounder every year. Tet McMillan's a first rounder every year. Again, unless they run like 4, 6, 5. So there's a little projection. And
they kill someone in the next month or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You have to stick the landing. Maybe there's maybe Josh Simmons isn't on the list because insiders have more information. It's like, this is not an injury that's going to go well for Josh Simmons. So teams don't.
And that's what we don't know.
Or Mike Green, there's been some whispers that there's some off-field stuff with him, and before he transferred to Marshall, so it's hard. But like, you tell me, Mike Green, 17 sacks, isn't a first-round guy most years. I find that a little bit hard to believe. And so,
would he have battled like Verse and Turner to be first edge last year? Maybe that's not crazy, And
again, it depends what you call a first-round grade, but it's it's weird for me to see tight ends and safeties and, nickel guys on the list as super clean first rounders. And then, other players that Luther Burden and Tet McMillan and, whoever else left off the list. That just seems a little odd to me, but I kind of agree with the premise, and it should be taken even further. The clean first round grades is actually a smaller list, but the depth of first round pool of talent is actually a little bit bigger, I think.
The last guy I wanted to bring up along these lines too is like Mason Graham to me. Mason Graham is a first rounder no matter what year he comes out. I mean, he's definitely on that list, the big list. But I think because this class is so suspect at the beginning, everyone thinks he's now being considered like a blue chip player. Well, he's not Quinnen Williams or Big Daddy Wilkerson first overall. I mean, like these crazy freak, defensive tackles, Big Daddy Wilkerson.
Good pull there, by the way.
I was trying to think of any defensive tackle first overall.
And I think Mason Graham is probably the most likely guy that he's very high on everybody's list right now. And then post combine, he looks good, but not amazing. Right. But then, Will Campbell goes up and has longer arms, and all of a sudden Walter Nolan shows up and is people are like, oh, is Walter Nolan actually the best tackle in this class? He's a more explosive athlete than Mason Graham is. And Tet McMillan shows up and runs 4.4s, and it's like, oh, he's going to be a top 5 guy now. And Luther Burden and Will Johnson, and all of a sudden, you could see Mason Graham actually start to slide out of that top 5 a little further, and who knows, maybe even sneak out of the top 10 after the combine if all these guys do stick the landing. And Jalen Walker shows up and he's 6'3", 250 with 34-inch arms. And teams are like, okay, I can't pass up on that at number 8 or whatever. And so that's why there's a lot to be determined here. And I think the draft the combine is important, and you don't want to overvalue the measurables, but just like there's so many guys in this class that are so tightly graded, in my opinion, that like, how can you have that big of a difference in grade between the guy who's number 8 on your list right now and the guy who's number 20 on your list right now, which is why I disagree so much about the idea of there's only 12.
I hear what you're saying. I think it's great points. I bet there's 5 defensive tackles that are more athletic than Graham next week. I mean, no doubt in my mind. There might be 15. I mean, there's a lot. And then we're just going to talk about him as, well, he's a nice, safe pick. You know, he's a leadoff double. And that's great. And there's something to be said for that. I don't think he'll be a bust, but I don't know that he'll be Aaron Donald or Chris Jones, you know.
And again, even a guy like Tyler Warren, everyone loves Tyler Warren, but he's going to finish the job with his athletic testing at the combine. If you're going to go as a tight end in the NFL draft.
Yeah. I mean, like Jalon Carter is a better defensive tackle prospect than any of these guys. And it's a loaded defensive tackle class.
So I love the idea of Will Campbell and that comparison to Zach Martin, right? College tackle, you're going to go inside potentially in the NFL, and you fit the profile of being a guard in the NFL. Is Will Campbell that good of a player? And even still, Zach Martin, and everyone loved Zach Martin coming out, but again, he still went pick 16 in the NFL draft.
I think so, yeah.
Because he was a guard, and he was a Hall of Fame guard, right? He's that good of a player. By the way, you know who went 3 picks ahead of him in the same draft?
That's the Beckham Evans wide receiver draft. I don't know, though.
Aaron Donald.
That was a really good class, by the way.
Yeah, so
that was a really good class.
Generational all-time interior guys in the middle of that class, pick 13 and pick 16, I believe it was, with Aaron Donald and Zach Martin, who retire now in back-to-back years. So anyway, I just wanted to bring up Zach Martin because he had such a phenomenal career and deserves his flowers, as the kids say.
And I think he was slipping a little bit this year, and then there was injuries, and I think it's time. You don't want to be, a year or two late there. But he's going to moonwalk into the Hall of Fame.
One last note on the draft stuff. And again, this isn't like I disagree with Matt Miller, as a lot of people like teams draft boards are going to be different. And that's kind of the last thing I wanted to mention here with this is like, I think it's more indicative of how different everybody's going to value all these players. And so this could be a draft where it really shocks us because how different everyone looks at it. There's a team that looks at it like you and I do. And there might be a team that says, look, I'll give up a lot to trade up into the top whatever to get one of these guys because we think there's a huge difference. And like we want to get a first round player. So we'll trade up from 20 to 9 to get
there might be 3 teams saying, take it.
And there might
we don't want to be here, right?
There might be teams the opposite that are sitting at pick 9 and we're like, we've got the same grade on this guys we're going to get at pick 20. So sure, we'll take a free pick. And because this, and so that'll be fascinating to me if that's what moves the needle and that's what forces trades in this draft, because it's probably not going to be for the quarterbacks. And every team has their first round pick for the first time ever. Our team's really just gripping these picks tight and don't want to give any of them up either. So will there be a lack of trades because of that? But I do think there's potential for teams to have wildly different boards. And we're always shocked by the NFL draft anyway. But there's someone really shock us going because, late first round when you see somebody go, that's because, the first round grades are gone and teams are drafting from their second round group of players and they like this guy the most. And you see like Cole Strange go and you're like, what the heck? Cole Strange? Thought he was going to be a third rounder. Okay, he was a late first rounder instead. Might we see that earlier in this class?
And what I also think is interesting too is like, Warren, Genty, Malachi Starks, who I also thought should have been on that list. I think he's a first rounder every year.
If you're going to include running backs and tight ends, how do you not put the safety in the class in there? Yeah.
Like people might look at them as they're like clear top 10 players, but nobody trades up for a safety, tight end, or running back.
Yeah. No. Even
when's that happen?
Even Lions traded down and then took Gibbs, right? Because they're like, well, we're not going to take a running back here. Let's at least they went from 6 to 12. Somebody went up. I can't remember who went up with them, but I think
they had a couple firsts that year. That was Jack Campbell.
We're going to take a running back, but we're going to get some extra picks and take a running back, right?
Yeah, people don't trade up for tight end, safeties, and running backs,
right? But that's also why those players won't fall out of the first round is because there will be a GM that sits there and looks at their draft board and we're like, Genty's been the number 1 guy on our board for the last 3 hours and nobody's taken him. Are we just going to not take the guy who's the number 1 guy on our draft board right now? And
it's like Hamilton with the Ravens. Like they didn't need him, but I got to take him. Right?
Yeah, exactly. The Ravens are really good at that, by the way, of taking a guy.
Yes.
This is a blue chip
Linderbaum.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Let us know what you think at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Drop a comment on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe while you're there. And guess what? It's mock draft season.
Yeah.
Williamson's mock draft 1.0 this week. How about Peacock's mock, the Peacock mock 1.0. That will be for you on Monday right here Peacock and Williamson. Trades coming too, by the way.